Hello there and welcome to my session for this year's Cyber Back to School. It is October 2025. As you can see here, we've got Captain Hyperscaler himself, aka Dwayne Natwick, up on the screen. Many thanks to him again for running this great community initiative. It's great to get cloud security into the forefront and into the top of our minds. And in this session, I am going to be talking to you about Azure PaaS security, and Azure PaaS security in a nutshell. For those of you who haven't come across me before, I'm Michael Durkin. I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP and Azure Solutions Architect. I'm based in Ireland. I've authored LinkedIn Learning courses. I speak at numerous events across Europe, and I'm also a content creator and write on my blog and also publish videos on YouTube. So if you haven't found my YouTube channel, my blog, I'll be giving you details of those later on at the end. But let's jump into Azure PaaS. And I think the best place to start is, what is Azure PaaS? So Azure PaaS, it's a collection of fully managed services to connect applications, data and processes. Okay, so we're abstracting away from the traditional virtual machines, the traditional IaaS layer, and we're taking that responsibility for the hardware, for the operating systems, and for the maintenance of those away, offloading those to Microsoft in the form of PaaS services. So if we take a look at what the various PaaS services are, just to flavour them here. So you've got Logic Apps, which is your fully managed workflow service, automate your processes. You've got access to hundreds of connectors to systems like Salesforce, SAP, Office 365. You can integrate without writing any custom code for those systems. Next up is API management, which is an API gateway service. Allows you to expose your API securely, whether they're running in Azure, on AKS, App Service Functions, or on premises. And APM is also providing you with developer portal and standard authentication protocols like OAuth and JWT validation. You've got throttling, caching, monitoring for your APIs. You've then got your core messaging services. So you've got Service Bus, which is your message queue, topic broker. You've got Event Hub, which is your big streaming data platform and event ingestion service. And then you've got Event Grid. And Event Grid is your event distribution service that's using your pub/sub, your publish and subscribe model, and that focuses on routing events as well. And in combination, those services can work really well. You've then got Azure Functions, which is your serverless functions platform where you can put in your chunks of code. You've got App Service, and your app service is where you can host things like your backend APIs, your static web apps. You can also host functions and logic apps within app service plans. And you've got your SQL services, which I suppose Azure SQL is one of the ones that came out of a traditional IaaS service, but you can now get fully managed, fully PaaS versions of Azure SQL that are managed for you. So Microsoft is managing all of the infrastructure in the back end for you, and you're just managing the database end of it. And then alongside that, you've got other database services that are NoSQL services, things like Cosmos, and then you've got Postgres there as an option as well, but you've got a number of different options there as well. What are the benefits of PaaS services? You've got instant productivity and speed to deploy, so you don't need to spin up infrastructure or build servers or deploy operating systems. It's there, it's ready to go. Okay. You've got your managed infra from Microsoft, as I said. So in the back end, Microsoft is managing all of the infrastructure, all of the networking for you once you define it. They're managing the backbone, all the servers. And it's also scaling and resilience. You've got instant scaling, instant resilience. You're not having to, again, provision more servers, join them to clusters, all that sort of thing. You've got full scaling and resilience there available to you. Okay. And it's important to talk a little bit about that, because one of the things I like talking about, you've probably seen this slide on my decks before, that's the shared responsibility. And some teams will assume that Azure will cover all security for you, okay, but in reality, your customer side measures are crucial. Okay, so as you can see here, we've got our SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, and on-prem on-premise full customer responsibility. The IaaS model moved that away and took the physical element of that away. Okay, so Microsoft became responsible for managing the physical infrastructure around the networks and the data centers. When you get up into PaaS, Microsoft also takes the operating system away from you. Okay, but then you've got shared responsibility around the network controls, the applications, and the identity. So important to note that Microsoft will provide you with the ability to put the network controls in place. So they'll provide you with the network infrastructure. They will provide you with the applications, i.e. they'll provide you with a place to run your applications on, if that's a function app, a logic app, an app service. And they'll also provide you with identity and directory infrastructure in the form of Entra, OAuth, JWT, whatever identity platform you want to integrate. Okay, but it's then your responsibility from a PaaS side of things to integrate that, to manage that. Okay, so that's an important distinction we need to make here. Moving into that then, the need for PaaS security. And effectively what we're saying here is that because this cloud native and identity focus, cloud PaaS is really changing the security perimeter. Okay, so traditionally, if we go back into the IaaS model, security was centered on the network boundary. That was firewalls and network zones. In Azure PaaS, identity is often the new perimeter. Okay, so you need strong authentication and access control via Entra to protect the apps and data more effectively than an IP-based boundary. Okay, that traditional firewall with a DMZ that we all would have seen in our comms rooms and our data centers, that's gone. We're now in an identity world. Okay, you've got a different security model because unlike VMs in a VNet or physical machines, PaaS services operate in a multi-tenant cloud environment with abstracted infrastructure. Okay, and there can be blind spots there. And that's going back to the previous slide where I was talking about the shared responsibility model. Again, Azure and the other cloud providers as well, AWS, Google, Oracle, whoever it is, they will provide you with the network infrastructure, but you have to implement the controls. Okay. Another thing about PaaS, you've got data exfiltration risks, and without those proper controls, sensitive data can be accidentally exposed or maliciously exfiltrated. Okay, you know, a prime example of that would be if you've got a static web app that's talking to a database at the back end. Okay, if the controls are not in place, let's say on the front end of the web app, or if there's a security vulnerability on it, that causes a problem. Attackers can target that web app to get to the data that's in the backend database and attempt to exfiltrate that out. Okay, so that's an important one. Because you've abstracted away the OS and network management, you've got logging and visibility gaps. Okay, so you've got reduced visibility in security events. You can't just go into the event viewer on the OS and start going through your events. Okay, you've got to do that in a different way. For example, in log analytics via KQL queries or whatever your logging platform is. And obviously then you've got misconfigurations. Okay, and really a significant portion of cloud security incidents stem from misconfigurations. In fact, you know, if you look at the statistics that are out there, anywhere between 20 to 25% of cloud security incidents are caused by misconfigured cloud resources. Okay, and that could be something as simple as not enabling encryption or leaving default passwords in place or missetting network rules. Okay, as I said, it's not about network security so much anymore. We're not talking about that perimeter. You know, identity is the perimeter, and really, you know, if you take a look at that, you know, 20 to 25%, human error is behind the majority of those misconfigurations. Okay, and that then ties into the need for better automation, better reviews, better governance. So if we take a look at how SKU choices for PaaS services impact security, okay, Azure PaaS will offer, you know, multiple SKU tiers for each one of its services. Okay, and there is no common ground here. Okay, so for example, there is no commonality between logic apps and function apps. Okay, they both have certain tiers. They've got consumption tiers, then they've got, you know, like isolated tiers above that. If you take a look at, for example, the 3 messaging tiers, you've got Service Bus, you've got Event Hub, and you've got Event Grid. They've got different SKU models as well. Okay, so, and if you're going to build systems with each of those services, or, you know, a lot of those services integrated, you just need to be careful in terms of, you know, how you're doing this. So, you know, making the right SKU choice is essential for balancing security, features, and cost. You know, you've got that features versus cost trade-off. Okay, so higher SKUs often include, you know, the advanced networking features like isolation, backup, etc., but they will come at a higher cost. Okay, lower tier SKUs are cheaper, but they may lack the critical capabilities needed for a secure environment. Okay, you've got network integration availability. Okay, historically, some network security features were only available in high-end SKUs, such as isolated or dedicated compute SKUs for PaaS services. Okay, but Azure is broadening that out now to support the lower tiers. If we take a look at app service, okay, the basic SKU now supports virtual network integration outbound, okay, and private endpoints inbound. And that means that even lower cost plans can be injected into your VNet and accessed privately. So that's achieving a massive security boost, which at one point required a premium tier which came at a higher cost. Okay, so you can actually utilize cost-effective tiers without sacrificing network security. Okay, the other thing then you're talking about here is scale and redundancy. Okay, so once you get into higher SKUs, you're getting into things like zone redundancy, you're getting into geo redundancy across multiple regions. Okay, that's going to improve your resiliency. All right, just throwing this up on screen, if you take a look at like the app service, which I'm talking about here, okay, you've got, if you look at the various different SKUs there on the left-hand column, and then you look at, you know, VNet integration and private endpoints are not available in the free or shared tiers, and that's really only for dev and test cases, but we're actually closing that gap to a point where they're not really used. They're used by probably guys like me who are kind of playing around with stuff at home. You're not going to use that in a production environment, even for a POC, because the basic tier is now introducing things like VNet integration and private endpoints. Okay, and that's massive from a security perspective. Whereas before, you would have gone to a premium tier, and for example, your isolated tier for your app service environments is going to be fully in a VNet. So you've got VNet integration inbound and outbound, okay, which gives you the high secure isolation. Now, so all of a sudden what you're doing here is you're not talking about security in terms of, damn it, I need to go to a higher SKU. You've suddenly got a broad range of security options there, but what you're actually doing now is you're saying, okay, what's my use case? What do I need? Is it a small app? Do I have a production app with moderate traffic? Or do I need a highly secure, isolated environment which needs more scale, more features, zone redundancy, high throughput? And that's where things like premium and isolated will come in. Okay. When you talk about VNet integration obviously is there to, you know, it eliminates public exposure. Okay, so once integrated, your resource can be configured to accept traffic only from the VNet or through a private endpoint. It removes it from the public internet. Okay, so for example, back to our app service there, your VNet integration and a private endpoint means that your clients on the private network can reach the app at a private IP, which is available and integrated into your DNS zones. Okay, so, you know, that's the benefit. You know, that's a huge benefit there. It's taking it off the public internet. Public access is turned off. It's not publicly accessible. Okay, doesn't mean it's not open to security issues, but we'll look at that, you know, later in the presentation. So you've got secure backend access. Okay, they can securely call backend services, you know, databases, storage, or APIs in the VNet without traversing the internet. Everything stays on the secure network and travels across Microsoft's backbone. Okay, I talked about the on-prem extension there, where the resources can be accessed from on-premises via secure tunnels, via VPN or ExpressRoute. And then you've also got the added security feature of, you've got a VNet, because it's private, your NSGs and your firewall rules come into play, and they can filter traffic to and from the PaaS resource like any other subnet traffic, so you gain more granular control over what can access your resources. Okay. Taking a look at the methods there, I talked about a few of them there. Service endpoints, it doesn't give your service a private IP, but it tells the service to trust the traffic from your VNet. Okay. You've then got private link, private endpoint, where you're getting a private IP, and the PaaS service you choose, okay, in this case we're looking at SQL, that's getting a private IP address in your VNet via network interface. So it brings your service fully into the VNet space, okay? You expand on that a bit further and you get into subnet delegation and delegated subnets, okay? And this is where your subnet is fully delegated to that service, and no other services can sit within that subnet apart from your delegated service, okay? It's a good security feature. It's only available on certain services. Off the top of my head, things like app service, Kubernetes, SQL will all have subnet delegations, okay? The other one then is service tags. If you've got service tags in a network security group, it allows traffic, to pass from known Azure addresses, okay? So you can see we've got, destination service tag there of, let's say, storage, which is the global one, or you can bring it down to regional stuff, which is like, SQL.EastUS. So there's also going to be a storage.EastUS or a storage.North Europe available for use there. Let's move on to network security perimeter, okay? And network security perimeter allows, it's one of the new Microsoft services, okay? Went into GA, I think it was early 2024 when network security perimeter went GA, but it allows grouping of various Azure PaaS services, okay? What's it there for? Okay, it's a grouping of services into a trusted boundary. Okay, so you can see here in the network security perimeter I've got on the screen here, you've got a key vault, you've got your app insights from Azure Monitor, you've got storage, and you've got log analytics. Okay, they're all contained within the network security perimeter. They're isolated within their own network. Okay, and they're isolated within the network because once you create the network security perimeter, you've got a default deny. Okay, so nothing inside that network security perimeter can get out. Okay, you can set it up that things can get in, okay, but you have to create allow rules to allow certain outbound or inbound access to specific endpoints as needed. Okay, so that's important. Within the perimeter, they can talk to each other. Okay, so the key vault, the storage, the app insights, the log analytics, they can all talk to each other. Okay, but they can't talk outbound, or nothing can talk inbound to them unless you create the specific rules. Okay, so it's an interesting feature. All right, if we look at what's available as part of network security perimeter at the minute, okay, you've got a couple of services that are GA. Okay, so at the minute you've got Azure Monitor, you've got AI Search, Event Hubs, Key Vault, storage, and in public preview then at the minute you've also got Cosmos DB, SQL DB, and Azure OpenAI. Now, key thing to this is for network security perimeter, obviously in preview, the previews are provided, without a service level agreement, so they're not recommended for production workloads. Okay, but the PaaS resources themselves have to be private link aware resources. Okay, so they have to have private link availability. So going back to our app service, there earlier, let's say if app service ever went on the roadmap, you wouldn't get free or shared tier because it doesn't have private link support. It has to have private link support if it's going into a network security perimeter. If you want to build on top of your PaaS security, number of different ways you can do that. Okay, we talked about identity and access management, and identity being the perimeter. Okay, because that is what it is. Okay, we're not living in the firewall DMZ world anymore. We're in the perimeter now. That's all about principles of least privilege, multi-factor authentication, managed identities, and key vault. It's vitally important. The one I'm probably missing off here then is privileged identity management. Okay, must do better on the next presentation. But it's important. Least privilege covers that. And it has to be time sensitive as well. Okay, if we get into application security, then we're talking about secure coding practices. So that's things like, scanning your code, checking for inconsistencies, checking for security. Things like GitHub Advanced Security, add-ons will help for that. WAF, Web Application Firewall. Obviously, I talked about API management. I talk about putting APIs into app service plans, static web apps, etc., etc. They're going to be surfaces APIs. Make sure they're behind a WAF, and make sure you've got your WAF rules turned on. What's the golden rule of WAF? When you turn it on, nothing works because you've got the OWASP core rule set. If you put that on there as well on your WAF, on your application gateway, or on your front door. HTTPS and certificates, make sure it's HTTPS only, make sure your certificates are up to date, and make sure you've got a way of monitoring your certificates as well for cert expiry, okay, because that's one of the big things that can cause an issue. And then you've got Defender for Cloud. You've got a full Defender for Cloud suite. You've got Defender for storage, Defender for SQL, Defender for APIs, Defender for containers. Use them, integrate them, get them scanning for risks, check the recommendations, act on the recommendations. Okay, that's what I would say. More building blocks for PaaS security. We talked about network security and monitoring. We've got our NSGs and firewalls, which we talked about, where we can implement our rules or our service tags. Private DNS. Integrate with Azure Private DNS. Okay, the service is there. You've got DDoS protection, which you can wrap around this, and as well as this, then you've also got service limits that are available to you within each of the PaaS services. So, for example, you can set, if you're going for a DTU model in SQL, you can set, certain limits based on your SKU. Okay, you can set certain limits on logic apps, function apps as well, the number of executions they can do. You've also got logging and alerts. Okay, so get everything logged, get it into log analytics, app insights, use your KQL queries, and then you're into regular audits then on top of that. And that brings you into governance and policy, where you've got Azure policy, you've got your built-in compliance standards in there, and you've got backup and recovery, okay, via either the built-in Azure PaaS backup service. You've got resiliency then coming out of things like app service, where you can go across availability zones and multi-region, or you've got things like Azure backup for stuff like, Azure SQL managed instance, or for things like storage accounts. And the storage accounts, you got to remember, will be hosting some data for things like your logic apps, your app service plans, your function apps. So important to make sure you're aware of the chain and keep it all backed up and available. So let's take a look at the common challenges that are available there. Misconfiguration and drift. Okay. Ensuring that all your resources remain in compliance over time is hard. A storage account created by a dev might accidentally be left with public access, and that's where you can use automated scanning and policies to catch these. Things like Azure Policy, will help with that. It'll raise issues. You can set up alerts out of that. Keeping up with features. I said that network security perimeter came into effect early last year, early 2024. Microsoft is always releasing, updates, new features, or new private link capabilities. Stay current on these because it helps you enhance security. Okay, many didn't use private link when it was new, but now it's essential. Okay, and maybe that's an encouragement for an architecture review every couple of months from your team, based on what your architecture is doing, based on what your app is doing. Are there new features that could help enhance it? Are there new security features that could help enhance your security posture? Next up, balancing security and cost. Talked about that earlier with the app service example, with the SKUs, and we often weigh the cost of higher SKUs or extra security services. It's an either or, okay, and it's a challenge to justify cost increases for security. So you could leverage the lower cost options where possible, and that is now possible because a lot of the by default security features that we would expect, like VNet integration and private link, are coming back into the lower cost tiers. Okay, so you could use the lower cost options and present security spend as a risk mitigation. Okay, Another big thing is, calculate the cost of potential incidents versus preventative measures. Okay. Security features pay off by avoiding even one incident sometimes. Okay. And they will sit there and it will burn money out of your operating margin, but it is worth it, because if you get hacked and you have to do a payoff to someone who has got you for ransomware, then that's a problem. The pay-as-you-go model, for example, in Azure will let you enable things like Defender on critical resources without a huge upfront cost. Okay. I talked about shared responsibility model right at the start, and sometimes there is a gap between teams. We assume that ops is handling security and ops assumes the platform is, and that's about culture. You need to foster a culture where everyone is responsible for cloud security. Use Azure Advisor. It's built in, it's there, it's free, it's on every service. You open up the service in the portal, Azure Advisor is there telling you and giving you a recommendation to say, you need to put this into a VNet, you need to make this service highly available and resilient across availability zones. And then you've got a full Advisor application in the Azure portal, which is giving you a full look at all of your resources. Use it. Make sure it's there, make sure you pay attention to it. Last one then, incident response for PaaS. Many organizations will have playbooks for VM breaches, but not for PaaS incidents. So understand how to respond if, let's say, the certificate of your app service is compromised, or if it's expired and an attacker has injected code into your web app. Okay, use those capabilities, like I talked about the WAF. Okay, I talked about app service access restrictions, SQL threat detection. Use those features, to respond to alerts fast. Key takeaways. Choose the right platform and SKU. Okay, there's various different PaaS offerings and tiers that should meet your security needs. Don't over provision on security features. Enable VNet and private link support using at least basic or standard tiers for production workloads. And it really depends on how critical your workflows are, how public facing your workflows are. Okay. Embrace identity driven security. Okay. Use Entra for authenticating users and services where possible. Okay. Whether that's workload identity federation from Azure DevOps, whether that's, service connections. Treat your identities as the primary gatekeepers to your PaaS resources. Okay. Not your WAF, not your firewalls, not your NSG rules, your identity. Enforce your least privilege in MFA, and you have to assume that network boundaries will be crossed. So make sure that only the right identities can access your data. Defense in depth, leverage those network controls. Okay, even in PaaS, network security still matters. Okay, use, and you can combine, we talked about network security perimeter there. Use network security perimeter alongside NSGs, firewalls. Create those enclaves of trust. Block any unexpected egress. Okay, it'll significantly shrink your attack surface and prevent data leakage. Okay. Utilize your Azure security services. Okay, turn on Defender. Okay, use WAFs, use NSGs. I've talked about them already. Key Vault, monitoring tools. Okay, Azure provides these as building blocks. They shouldn't be seen as services in isolation. They should be used together. Okay, so for example, securing your app might involve Key Vault for your secrets. It might involve App Gateway and WAF for front door protection. Okay, and monitor logs with alerts for detection. Okay, so if you put those three together, that's a quite simple playbook to implement. Okay, because you've got those services there by default. Use them. Continuous monitoring and improvement. Cloud environments are dynamic. Okay, so regularly review your logs, your alerts, your secure score. Investigate your anomalies. Small signs could indicate problems and probing attempts. Okay, keep learning. Conduct your drills, update your incident response plan to include your PaaS services. Okay, today's best practice could be replaced by a new Azure feature tomorrow. You just don't know. what's coming. That could drop on Azure updates, that something has gone generally available or something's gone into preview. Who knows? Balance your security and usability. Communicate with your decision makers about the risk versus cost trade-offs. Okay, a modest spend on enabling a security feature can prevent a costly incident. Okay, so make those informed decisions. Evaluate the sensitivity of your applications, but apply the highest security options available when you're looking at system of record or customer data. Okay, justify your investment in security. It's massively important. And that is all from me. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoy this. Again, thank you to Dwayne for organising this event. You can take a look at my blog at michaeldurkin.com. Email address is there. Please email me. Always interested in feedback, always interested in hearing from the community. And you'll find me on my various social channels and on YouTube as well. And don't forget to check out the full schedule on cyberbackToSchool.com for this year's event and also for previous events. Thanks again for your time. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.